Moi everyone and welcome to Finish Your Plate. Salmon soup is of course the most classic Finnish soup. Most often it's served in a creamy broth with bunch of vegetables, bunch of big pieces of salmon and of course dill. But there's another variation which is the clear salmon soup which omits the heavy cream from the broth. So it's maybe a little bit lighter version of the same theme. Whichever theme you like, do not have it without some freshly baked rye bread. This clear salmon soup, it still has the same components to it, obviously big pieces of salmon. It has the same root vegetables and a ton of dill. And this is especially great when made with fresh vegetables straight out of the garden or maybe the market. So join me and I'll show you how to make this variation of the salmon soup. I have here the ingredients for the clear salmon soup. Of course, I have a nice piece of salmon right here. And then the usual vegetables. There's rutabaga, celeriac, which is basically the root part of a celery plant. I have here some carrots, different color carrots that I happen to have. There's a regular orange carrot in here too. If you use strong colored carrots like purple carrots, be a little bit careful. I used them one time and my whole broth turned purple, so that could happen. Same with potatoes. Speaking of potatoes, I have here a couple medium-sized potatoes. And then onions, of course. I have these green onions, spring onions, that are usually available in May, June time, which still have the entire green stem on them and the bulbs like this. These are definitely my favorite this time of the year. And then, of course, I have here a bunch of dill, a couple of spices, the usual spices. There's bay leaves and whole allspice. And for the broth, I'm using chicken stock. So this way the broth doesn't come out too fishy. You could certainly use fish stock too, but I kind of like the chicken stock here. I'll prep my vegetables. I'm going to prep them pretty rustically because I don't feel like cutting them really fine. Whichever way you want to go, whether you want to make them small, diced, large rustic pieces, doesn't matter. Just make them about uniform size so they will cook evenly. And the salmon, I like to keep it in large pieces. If you cut it into small pieces, there's always a danger that it'll kind of disintegrate into the soup. Of course, that's your preference. If you like that, go ahead and do that. Some people have also asked me if you can use canned salmon here. You could, but just remember that the canned salmon is already cooked, so it really does not require any cooking, and any cooking further will definitely make it disappear into the soup. Pot over here. And add my spices in here too. And a good pinch of salt. So this can start warming up while I work on my other ingredients. The salmon is much easier to cut if you freeze it for just a little bit. Maybe like an hour in the freezer or something like that. And now it's much easier to cut it into large chunks. Sometimes you could peel rutabaga with a peeler like this, but because of the wax layer on it, it might get clogged. Then just use a knife like this. This one seems to be peeling pretty readily with the peeler. Raw rutabaga has this smell. It's kind of like cabbage. It's pretty mild, but when you cook it, it becomes this really sweet vegetable. I remember one time, I think it was in preschool or something like that, they gave us a bunch of different root vegetables to try. One of them was just a large chunk of raw rutabaga, and I took a bite of it, and I hated it. I know now why, because raw rutabaga by itself, probably not the best thing to give children. But again, once you cook it, it's really delicious and sweet. I cut these down a little bit more, these large pieces. And celeriac, this one is pretty difficult to peel, so using a knife is probably just your best bet. So what you do is you just slice the top layer off. And with the onions, I'm gonna save the green part for later. Just gonna use the bulb piece. Okay, my broth has come to a simmer and my vegetables have been prepped. So, in they go. There we go. And I'm just going to top this off. A little bit more broth. And I'm going to put the lid on. And now we're just going to simmer these until all the vegetables are done. Okay, now it's been about 15 minutes or so. Let's check how our vegetables are doing. And let's also check salt at the same time. Let me try to pick a large piece of rutabaga. Okay, so the vegetables are al dente. Again, that's your preference whether you want it al dente or maybe a little bit softer. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add the salmon. And I will just mix this up a little so the salmon can get in there and cook. There we go. And also I'm going to add a little bit of the green onions from earlier that we saved. And of course, a huge bunch of dill. Now I'll just put the lid back on and we're going to wait for the salmon to cook. So I will take this off the heat. And add the butter. Time to serve ourselves a bowl of salmon soup. Add a little bit more dill for garnish. So let's give it a taste test. Is this as good as the cream-based salmon soup? Let's get a little piece of salmon in here too. This soup is definitely a lighter version of the creamy salmon soup. And not necessarily in a bad way. The butter does bring in some richness to it. But Of course, if you had cream in it, it's going to be a lot richer. But if you want to avoid milk, if you're allergic, lactose intolerant, whatever, this is a great alternative. It's still a very hearty soup, very comforting, and I especially like the whole onions that are in here together with all the other vegetables. And again, I like having these large pieces of salmon in here too. So, thanks for watching, and I hope you try this yourself. I'll see you next time on Finish Your Plate.